How do you put a value on the gift of the gab? Well, today we'll hear from the man who's turned it into a billion-euro enterprise. This is the Architects of Business, Joe's weekly series of interviews with leading entrepreneurs in partnership with EY Entrepreneur of the Year. I'm Tadhg Enright, and today I'll be chatting to Pat McCann, who started Dalata Hotels just before the crash and managed to make the crisis work for him. Pat, thanks very much for coming in to talk to us today. Things seem to be going absolute great guns in the hotel business right now.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a kind of a pinch yourself and say, how did we get here in such a short space of time? Because it's not very long ago when we had the famous Peter Bacon report that said we needed to lose 10,000 rooms out of Ireland because we were over-hotelled. And suddenly we're moving in the opposite direction where there's a shortage in some of the key urban areas.
I mean, how does the number of rooms out there right now, and we know there's, lots of people say there's a shortage, but how does the number now compare with, say, the peak of the boom?
At peak in Ireland, we had about 60,000 rooms, and we dropped down to below 57,000, and it is slowly coming back. And when you look at where the shortage is, really, it's in probably two urban areas. That's Dublin and Cork at this point in time. But Galway is catching up fast as well. So you will find that there will be a shortage, because the problem in the hotel business is that if it's not renewing itself, it suddenly finds itself with a shortage. It's like every city in the world has to have almost a constant build of new hotels, because old hotels get redeveloped or taken out of the system, and you have what we call natural wastage.
So we're not back up there, you're saying, to where we were at the peak of the boom. There was 60,000, and I mean, how much more do we need to go to close the gap?
Well, that's the big debate, because you see, outside the two major urban areas, Dublin and Cork, we probably have sufficient stock, but it's in those two areas where we have now seen a shortage. And it takes time for this to happen. And it also takes the economics to work as well. So it's not just good enough to say, well, we'll build hotels and, Dublin is flying and room rates are increasing all the time. The economics have to work as well for an investment case.
Market forces, though, being what they are, obviously if there's a shortage, the price goes up. And lots of people out there complaining about the price of hotels, particularly in Dublin right now.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at Dublin and look at it from an international perspective, and just even take it from a European perspective, we are number one in occupancy in Europe. And we've been tipping with London. They win one year, we win the next year. But in terms of room rate, we're number 10th in Europe. And I'm not talking about the big cities. I'm talking about places like that you could compare Dublin to, like Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Barcelona. We're still well behind this. We're about 15 to 20% behind those guys in room rate. So the idea that Dublin, from an international perspective, is expensive is simply not true. And the other thing that I would say is that the problem for the Irish consumer, where most of the complaints come from, is that they were used to 2009, 10, 11 and 12, when we had unsustainably low room rates, and suddenly we had to move on that. And it's no coincidence that you had little or no new hotel development in Dublin or in Ireland, because economics don't work. And if the economics don't work, they don't get built. Well, it's as simple as that.
How do you price your rooms? Is it based on what it costs to put them there, or is it based on demand? It's everyone's booking for July and August. We can put a bit more on there.
It's a very misunderstood art. So typically in a hotel, you have what you call your base business, which is things like tour operator or corporate business. And then sitting on top of that, you have what you call your transient. That could be leisure or corporate. And that price changes almost by the hour. So typically give today in Dublin, most of my hotels in Dublin could change the room rates for today 5 or 6 times, depending on the way demand curve is moving. And we have trending analysis, and we have lots of tools that help us price at the right rate. So if demand continues to go up, prices move upwards. If it starts to drop away, prices come down. But it's It's a very well defined art now.
Is that an algorithm out there kind of pulling those levers, or are there actual people making the decisions?
It's always human intervention. It is absolutely key to what we do. Without human we have the technologies, but without human intervention, technology usually makes the wrong decision.
I mean, what do you think is a kind of a fair price in a city like Dublin for a 3 or a 4-star hotel?
It's difficult to know what it depends on your point of view of fair. Like
A good quality one.
Like you have to be talking about €150 and northwards in terms of to give you an economic return. But you rarely get that, like, because when you look at the average prices achieved in Dublin over a 12-month period, it's about €120, €125. So it is still on the kind of outside point of where you would expect room rates to be from a European perspective.
So you're saying you make a loss actually with a room at 120?
No, you don't make a loss, but you don't give enough return in terms of the investment. So it's a question of, if I have a site, will I build a hotel, an office block, or a residential? And at the moment, offices will give you the best return, residential will give you the next best return, and hotels are third in the asset class that gives you return. So it is not as simple as say put up a hotel. There's an old joke told that if you want to become a millionaire in the hotel business, you have to start out as a billionaire. So it gives you a sense of where it's at.
So what led you into the trade then, Pat?
By accident.
Oops.
I was in Sligo. I come from South Sligo, which is a small farmland country. And in order to get a few bob for myself, I started working in the Yates Country Hotel in Ross's Point. And I got smitten with the bug. And the rest is history. So I've been in the business since 1969.
What was it about the bug that
it was just something about the interaction with people. And the opportunities that exist for people within our industry. And people say, well, there's not that many, but there's loads, and there's loads of things you do. And it is incredibly difficult from once you have this hotel bug to switch into anything else. It just doesn't do it for you.
It sounds addictive.
It is addictive, absolutely addictive. And a lot of people who are in it really love it and enjoy it.
And is it just the interaction with people?
It is, yeah. And you're usually in a kind of what I call a nice environment. So you tend to have lots of things going. And by and large, you meet lots and lots of nice people because they're in relaxed mode. They're either on holidays or they're away for a few days. So they're much more relaxed and it tends to be a nice environment.
Do you know sometimes I reach the end of a day and your face is almost aching from all the smiling you've been doing, and sometimes it might feel a little bit, forced by the end of the day anyway?
No, I think we Irish have a great propensity in the hospitality business, and all over the world you will find Irish people who have done extraordinarily well in the business because we have this natural ability to talk. And to make people feel comfortable. And it's a much sought after skill that doesn't exist in lots of nationalities. So we have this ability and it is one of the things that has worked very well for us.
So how does the trade today compare with back in the day when you were, making your way in the Yates Country Hotel, Yates County Hotel?
Yeah.
And even later on when you started getting involved in the Irish chains?
I suppose for the first probably 20 odd years of my life in the business, it didn't change that much. You had kind of, I suppose, semblances of technology beginning to appear. We got property management systems back in the 80s, which were so antiquated and so user unfriendly that it was simply untrue as to how it ever made it out. And then I suppose the real change has happened in the last 10 years, where what we call the disruptors have started, and you have things like the third parties, the OTAs.
The online booking websites,
online booking
and
websites,
Expedia.
absolutely. They have changed the face of things. And I suppose that has driven a huge level of activity around the way we use technology now, because hotels have had to respond to that in whatever way possible. And that has changed the way we do business and the way, I suppose, the big change is in the way we get our business now as opposed to years ago when it was much more personal and I suppose contact to contact.
Explain for me though how like a booking.com or whatever has changed things. So I suppose in the old days, somebody wanted to book a hotel, they either got in touch with a travel agent or they just kind of knew the hotel or saw an ad and picked up the phone and called them themselves.
Yeah.
The fact that people can go online and just, with a few clicks have a room booked, how has that changed things for you exactly?
Well, it's changed things in that the cost of acquiring your business has increased. So you're now paying commission, which you didn't before, because you have to pay a commission to OTAs if you want to use them. You don't have to use them, by the way. You can decide, I'm not using these, but then you're probably missing out on a vital kind of channel for new business. And that has fundamentally changed the way we think about business and how we do our mix of business. So, how much what we call owned business can you have in your hotel? And what I mean by owned business, like we pre-contract with tour operators, we pre-contract with our corporates who come direct to us, and we don't pay commissions on that. But we do have to discount the rates in order for that to work from the corporate and tour operator point of view. And then what you do is you give out to other distribution channels like the OTAs, but there are many others that you then give rooms out to in order to sell your hotel.
What about the way in which those booking websites kind of list the hotels? Because, obviously you can pay for, shall we say, preferential place in the listings. And there's also, every time I feel like I go on these websites, it feels like they're saying, well, there's only one room left. You better book it now.
Yeah,
is that true?
No. You see, the difficulty for the third parties, the OTAs, is that they're only given a small allocation. And they may only have one or two rooms left and as part of their allocation. But in reality, the hotel may have more rooms through other channels. So it's not true. And I see the EU are beginning to outlaw that now. They think it's an unfair practice that they're actually saying there's only 2 or 3 rooms left. And it's kind of forcing people to make a decision maybe quicker than they would normally, because they feel if they don't. The airlines do this all the time as well. You'll go on and you'll say 3 seats left. But that tends not to be true either.
Do you think people are wise enough to see through it at this stage?
I'm not sure that they do, actually. I think people get a little bit nervous when they see, limited availability, and they say, God, if we don't do something, there's going to be nothing left. So I think there's some challenges around that need to be rectified. But like I suppose, when you look at the way we have to pitch our business and the idea that, that business that comes direct to us is cheap or free is not true either, because if you're not paying money to booking.com, you're paying it to Google for AdWords, for positioning, for where you are, pay per click, so all of those things has changed the way, and we have now what we call specialists who are what we call revenue managers. They used to be, in the old days, there'd be a reservation manager, but now they're revenue managers because they have a much more dynamic effect on the way we do business.
What about the likes of Airbnb? Do you think does that need, are they a reasonable competitor, or do you think something's got to change?
What will happen over time is that you will have to have some form of regulation, because, when Airbnb was set up, it was set up that somebody would let a room in their house. But now you have what we call commercial Airbnbers, where they have a number of apartments or even blocks of apartments where they're being let under Airbnb. So they're quasi-hotels almost without the regulation. And what you'll see is that will get regulated, and that the traditional idea of how Airbnb works will be much more, I suppose, to the fore, for want of a better word.
Are you fine with Airbnb in that traditional form where it's somebody letting out their spare room?
Absolutely. Like you see, in many ways, you see, Airbnb are slightly different. Let's say if you look at somebody like Uber, where they were coming in and attacking a pretty dysfunctional business because, and I suppose ununified business in the taxi business, whereas Airbnb is attacking something that's pretty well established and well organised and well structured. So it's not as easy for those guys, even though they are the largest provider of accommodation in the world today, with a market cap greater than all of the hotel groups put together.
Your biggest competitor. Lots of people, and I know it's not necessarily, your field, but lots of people blame it for frustrating the housing crisis. Given the scale of Airbnb units that are on the market in a city like Dublin, do you think is that right, or is
is an element of truth in that, particularly in a place like Dublin where there is a shortage of space. And it is something that I have spoken about before in terms of needing to look at how apartments are going up on Airbnb. And the more you start to regulate the rental sector, you push people into this sector. So I think government needs to be careful about how they manage the rental sector and obviously Airbnb. But to be fair, the local authorities and I suppose the revenue commissioners are paying very close attention to Airbnb. People may not know, but if they put an apartment up on Airbnb, the revenue know about it. They know about the revenue they've got because Airbnb have to supply that information. But equally, you need planning. So your typical apartment or house doesn't have planning for short-term lets.
Listen, let's go back to the hotel trade and all the things you must have seen down through the years, because an awful lot of shenanigans goes on in hotels. You must have seen some great things in your time.
Yeah, I think that's overplayed a bit, and I think kind of the movies and the hype and the media and all of that overplay that. They can be pretty exciting places, but equally they can be pretty mundane. Like it's a routine, it's a business, it's the way you manage it. So there's, you know, people say to me, oh, there must be great things and you must have great stories. Well, in reality, you know, at the point in time, they probably were a bit funny. But, you know, as time went on, things just don't.
You must have a few gems now, Pat. Come on.
Well,
what's the strangest thing that's ever been left behind in a room?
I tell a story about when I became general manager of Jury's Balls Bridge, as it was. We used to have lots of issues with lost property. And I said, look, we have to sort this out because things would go into lost property and then they'd get sent on to the wrong address or whatever it was. So I said, look, we have the information. So when something is left in a room, we parcel it up and we send it to the address of the person who stayed in the room. So that was going absolutely fine until I got a call from a lady one morning to say that she'd received a night dress from us, but she had never stayed in the hotel. And she wondered why we were sending her something like this. And the penny suddenly dropped that the husband was playing away.
God, did you revise that policy from that point on?
I had to revise my policy very quickly. I said there's a good reason for everything, and that was the reason for that. So there's things like that you do, but there's lots of, I suppose, little stories. But you know of you know where things. Like I remember we had a large function one day for 400 people, lunch, rack of lamb, I remember it well, and we had one of these new fan-dangled ovens, you know, that, you know, would almost cook it itself. But of course, what happened was when the electronics went wrong, which it did, and the oven the door wouldn't open on the oven for some reason or other. And we had to get 400 racks of lamb out of this oven. And the chef decided he was going to try and break the glass, which would have destroyed everything because we couldn't put it. So we had to take the door off with brute force. And of course, by then the lamb had started to burn.
No longer pink.
And then people coming out of the function after said, how did we manage to serve such lovely charcoaled lamb?
Well, at least they were pleased.
They were pleased, yeah.
So we've covered the stuff that people leave behind in the rooms, but what do you find people nick a lot of?
Very little. Again,
come on now.
This is again something that rarely happens. Like there used to be back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot more of that. But in today's world, it's not. You lose the odd bathrobe and you lose things like that, and obviously all the slippers go very quickly. But by and large, the rest of it is not that relevant. Where you build it into your model. So it's not as significant at all in that sense, and I think we probably overplay that.
Okay. I'll take your word for it on that one. So when it comes to the job then that you do, you know, creating a great environment for guests, I mean, how do you, what are your kind of guiding principles on that?
I suppose from my perspective, and I suppose where I've always been is that I'm not in the hotel business. I'm in the business of hotels, which is a very distinct difference. And essentially because all my life I've worked, there's been three listed hotel companies in Ireland, which started out with Ryan Hotels, where I spent 20 years, 17 years with Juries Doyle, which was the second listed company, and now Dalata, which is the third listed company. So we were essentially businesses. We were publicly listed companies, so we had to make a profit, and we had to report every 6 months and do all of that good stuff. So I have to think of it very differently than a lot of others. Let's say Francis Brennan from the Park in Kenmare, who is absolutely in the hotel business. So it's a different model, and it has to work differently. And we operate, I suppose, through lots of channels in terms of the way we get their business, where somebody like the Park in Kenmare will have probably 1 or 2 channels, or maybe 3, where we'll have dozens. So it's a very different model that we operate from.
You make it sound a little bit less romantic.
It in one sense it is, but in another sense it's not. It's still the same principles apply, because at the end of the day, it depends on how our guests are treated and how much repeat business, and that is critically important for us. And we measure our customer satisfaction on every month. So we know exactly what they're saying about us, and we make adjustments depending on what they're saying, good or bad. And it's so important. And all the general managers are rewarded on how the customer expectations are met or not, as the case may be.
But I mean, you look back to where you began in the trade in the Yates Hotel in Sligo, and I mean, you must have got then a real sense of, personal pride when you saw a guest, walking away smiling, that you'd done something great for them. Is there any part of that still part of your life today, now that you're running 40 hotels around?
Absolutely, 100%. 100%. Like I was traveling down in my hotels on Thursday and Friday this week, and I got an email from a gentleman who stayed in our Silver Springs in Cork, and he was praising a couple of people, and he named them, and that gives you a great sense. And I use that as I go around the properties to kind of demonstrate how we should be doing things. And they had a little problem that they wanted sorted out, nothing to do with the hotel. But this guy went above and beyond the call, and he sorted it out for them. And it meant then that their stay was much more relaxed, and they were in a much better place. And that's what you expect. Do we do it all the time? Of course we don't. But you'd like to try and make sure that you do it as many times as possible. Because again, we are in a people business. And even though it's a business, it's fundamentally around people. So, and you have the 2 sets of people that we have to deal with fundamentally is our customer and our own staff. So they're kind of the 2 interactive points. And you have what we call the moments of truth. How do we deal with somebody when they're standing in front of you? That's the moment when you have the opportunity to make something great or not so great.
And have there been any times when somebody in that situation has either said something to your face that was kind of, obvious, you then realise, geez, something, we are doing that wrong?
Oh, absolutely.
And what was it, and what did they tell you?
Well, essentially it could be lots of different things, and it could be simple little things where, the way, for example, on our website, where we made it very difficult for people to pay by credit card because of the way we had the system set up. And it used to annoy people, and we had what we called cognitive overload for people who were trying to do this. And it's not good for business, actually, when you force your customer to think too much about the activities, particularly on the website.
Well, you want to make it easy for them to buy, don't you?
Absolutely.
And I mean, you must have had a few humdingers as well in terms of people complaining over absolutely nothing.
Yeah, again, I think that's overplayed. You see, the simple way that we have, and the culture of the business is that if a customer feels hard done by, then they're hard done by. It doesn't matter what excuse we have. And you fix it. You don't say, oh well, I think they're wrong or whatever. Because fundamentally, they felt that something has gone wrong and you need to fix that. And that's our attitude. So if somebody complains about something, we fix it. That's it. It's not saying, oh, I don't think you're right about that. And some places that's what you'll find. They're trying to make excuses. We don't do that. We just get on with it.
It takes a special type of person, though, I think, to have the patience to listen to those complaints, maybe, and even those that are kind of not very well founded, and still deal with it with a smile on their face.
Absolutely, but that's the business we're in. Like if you veer from that at all, or if you start to question your customer, I think you're on a slippy slope. So we try not to, in any way, question what a customer may say or do or think.
Pat, you were mentioning earlier, this is now your third listed hotel company, listed on the stock exchange. The first two were Ryan's and Jury's, two names that will stick out in many people's memories, although some of our audience might be a bit too young for them. What were the things you kind of learned from those that you've brought with you to Dalata?
Yeah, I suppose Ryan Hotels was a very entrepreneurial business. It was started by a guy called Dermot Ryan, and he was a visionary, albeit a little bit disjointed visionary, but he had lots of very good ideas, and he did lots of good things, and that kind of taught me that, if you think a little bit ahead, you start to look at things slightly differently, and you look at what's happening out in the big bad world, as they say, and so we would have looked to particularly the US, what's happening there, but even places like the Middle East and Far East, what's happening there as well. And albeit it's a very different model, and their cost structures are totally different to what we have. But in terms of concepts and things like that, you can learn a lot from what goes on elsewhere. And I suppose particularly in Jury's, when we were building the Jury's Inns, which was a fantastic business. It was started in May of 1993, and it got sold in 2007 for 1.165 billion.
Wow.
So
in 2007? Seven, right.
So quite a sizable business that was built up from nothing. And I was in that right from the beginning. In fact, I was involved in the design and the concept and all of that before we opened the door of a place. So that was quite an exciting business. So when I got the opportunity in Dalata, like a business, as I say, that was conceived in February of 2007 and born in August of that year, my plan was always to do what we're doing today. It got a little bit delayed in the process because of, obviously, events, dear boy, got in the way. And
that being the crash.
And of course, I remember vividly when we were raising the funds to buy Dalata in the first instance, everybody's talking a little bit about a credit crunch, but it was no concern. It would go away and, life would go on as normal and everything would be wonderful. And of course, that's not what happened at all. But I suppose it shows the resilience of the business because like in 2009, like that was our worst year. We were pretty okay, 07, 08, and 9 was really the problem year. But even with that, as we say, we didn't waste a good crisis, because what we did was we went to the banks and receivers and we offered to manage hotels on their behalf. And we ended up taking 37 hotels from banks and receivers, which we managed for a number of years. And that gave us income, but it also gave us depth and strength.
So when you get scent lemons, you make lemonade from it. That's like something you did.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose we were always good at taking opportunity, and Jury's would have been no different. We spotted gaps and we moved to fill those. And in Dalata, we're exactly the same. We spot gaps and we fill them. So we knew then by 2012 that the market had started to recover, even though people didn't quite believe it. But we could see movement in the right direction. Hence, we went out to raise some funds, and we tried to do it with private equity in 2013, which was really a waste. And then in 2014, we decided, let's float the business.
But talk to me a little bit more, though, about those early days of the crash, as it were, the early days of the company. 2007, you started, you had a wad of cash in the bank from having sold off Jury's, and you decided to pour it into something new.
Yeah.
I mean, how did those early years then pan out? Was there ever a point where you kind of thought with the crash, God, I've backed a lemon here, and things aren't going to go my way?
Absolutely. Like as I say, 2009 was a very difficult year for us, and it was I suppose a salutary lesson in the fact that while you think everything will go in smoothly and you don't need to worry. Of course, we did need to worry. We were lucky in the way we had structured the business back in 2007, in that we had pretty low debt and pretty high equity, which means we were well capitalized. So we weren't struggling around the edges. to trying to pay off debt or interest. So that stood to us as well. So I suppose hindsight is a wonderful thing, but when you're setting up a business, just make sure you get the balance between equity and debt right.
But I mean, you had the assets, so obviously nobody was going to take them away from you. But on paper, they must have looked like they were worth less.
Oh, they were worthless. Like the value of the business in 2009, we had paid 46 million for it in 2007. And the value of the business in 2009 was 2 million euro.
I mean, I can't even begin to work out the percentages on that.
Yeah,
but
so
it's shocking.
It was pretty devastating in that sense. And of course, then time moves on, because in 2014 that value had risen to 40 million, and today it's tipping 1.3 billion. So the numbers kind of
more percentages I can't work out very quickly.
but I suppose it taught us, that you have to be ever vigilant, and that to make assumptions that that everything will go smoothly is simply doesn't work like that. Business is not like that anyway. So,
but I mean, how did you convince people to kind of throw good money after bad at that that time of the crash?
Well, at the time of the crash, we weren't raising any money at that point. So we stuck with what we had, and like a lot of my investors who came into me in 2007 stayed with me and are still with me actually today, and have thankfully done well. So they were very resilient and stuck with the cause, as we would call it. And so we weren't under pressure on that side, believe it or not, which was good. And they could see what we were trying to do. And even though we were not a public company at that point, we behaved like we were a listed company. And I used to meet all my shareholders at least once a year, to tell them about the business and what we were doing and what we were trying to do, more importantly, and where we had still planned to take it. And most of them felt that the story was still good enough to stay with it.
So you made the kind of the best of a bad situation, running those hotels on the behalf of receivers who had taken them on, and then I guess starting picking up assets pretty cheap. I mean, lots of people kind of criticize big companies for buying things on the cheap when the crash came. I mean, obviously it's different when you're on the buying end and you realize you got a bar. Did you get any big bargains?
We did.
What did you pick up for a song?
Well, if I take it, we bought Clayton Sligo, Clayton Galway, and Clayton Whites in Wexford for a total of 43 million. Those three hotels, the cost of developing them was 145 million. We picked up Moore & Bewley for 453 million. In 2008, 6 of those hotels, we got 9 hotels for that. 6 of those had sold for 600 million. So we got a lot of good bargains along the way. But that, like, a bargain is what somebody is prepared to pay for it, and what and we knew that from once the banks would start to sell quickly and below what we call replacement cost, because you couldn't build a hotel for that amount of money. So we bought hotels that were well below replacement cost, and that stood to us and still stands to us today.
You mentioned another name in the hotel trade there that some people might remember, Moorings. I mean, what's the difference between a firm like you guys that set up in 2007 and went very aggressively into the market versus a name like that's been around for quite some time, but that didn't didn't come close to your scale now and ended up being swallowed up by you?
I think the big difference was the level of debt both of us had. It's simply down to that. It wasn't the fact that they were bad at what they were doing, because they weren't. It was just that they had too much debt, and the business couldn't cope with it. It's as simple as that. There's no other difference, actually.
So, I mean, it sounds like that's a big tip for you when it comes to getting into business, being careful with debt versus equity.
Absolutely, and making sure that your balance sheet is maintained in good stead. It is so important, and people forget that, and they really forget it when the market is strong and everything is going well, and they're sure, what's the problem? What could possibly go wrong? Well, we all know what could possibly go wrong.
Well, what about attracting money then as you go along, getting that new investment? I think you mentioned a fundraising round.
So what we do now is, obviously we raised 3 lumps of equity back in 2015 and in 14 and 15, and we obviously raised some debt. We between debt and equity, just over £500 million in equity, and about 300 million odd in debt. So about 840 million in total raised, and we've put that money all to good use. So we were buying hotels when it made sense to buy them, and we were building them now when it makes sense to build. But now we're moving into a different phase where, rather than own hotels, we will do long-term leases. So we've done a partnership with Deutsche Bank out of Germany, out of Frankfurt, who own 4 of our hotels currently. The most notable of that would be Clayton Burlington Road, which is the old Burlington for lots of people. And we will do more of that in the UK. So currently we are in planning for 5 hotels in the UK, about 1,500 odd rooms in those 5 hotels. And they will be owned by one of these investment houses. And we will do a 35-year lease arrangement with those. So they will own and build the hotel, and we will lease it. And rather than going back to our equity shareholders, it's a new way of funding our growth going forward.
So it's 40 hotels you have now, or thereabouts?
39 to be
39.
exact. Well, it depends. I always say, what time is it? And it changes. It changes almost by the hour.
40.
And we have, of course, another 3 to open this year, which is in Charlemont, just up the road from us here, one in Cork and one in Newcastle in the UK. And we have other things in the pipeline as well. So
big things.
So lots of things. So we will, later on this year, we will demolish the Tara Towers, as we call it, on the Merrion Road, and we're building a new 140-bedroom hotel and 70 residential units attached to that as well. So we're making better use of the site, which is a fine site but badly used.
And there's been so much talk about redeveloping that for so long now.
Absolutely. Well, it'll close at the end of September, and it'll get redeveloped over the next 2 years. So we have lots of things going on and lots of things in the pipeline as well, which I can't talk about because we haven't announced anything yet. But there's a lot of good stuff going on in our development space.
But you have talked about your ambitions kind of off of this island, haven't you?
Yes.
And how many places do you have in the UK now?
So we have 10 in total in the UK. We're building 5 more on top of that. But our plan is to build probably another 25 hotels in the UK over the next 5 to 7 years. About 8,000 rooms. So
and then onto the continent as well?
Then hopefully onto the continent. But we're a very focused company, so we focus on geographies as opposed to be hopping all over the place. So what we like to do is build a presence. We built a strong presence in Ireland. We're the largest by a mile in Ireland. We will build a strong presence in the UK in selected regional cities, and then we'll move to somewhere in Europe. But we'll have decided where we're going to in Europe over the next couple of years. Rather than wait until we're finished in the UK, we'll have decided, and we'll already have a foothold there before we finish our work in the UK.
And that's what, pick a country and try to populate
Absolutely.
it? Okay, as opposed to going all over the place.
Absolutely. It just doesn't make economic sense. You don't have the synergies if you're trying to jump and hop all over the place.
So many of the big names in hotel, in the hotel business these days, and I say big names, I suppose what I mean is startups.
Yes.
They don't have names that most people will know.
Yes.
Because, you'll have a rich person invest in some hotels, or bring in one of the big international chain names to kind of market it and be part of that.
Franchise system, yeah.
Why did you kind of say, actually, no, I'm going to make my own brands?
Because it's very simple. The way we operate is very different to most hotel companies in that when you look at large hotel companies, they have what we call a very centralized management structure, in that they bring a lot of things to the center, whereas we do the opposite. We decentralize. So each hotel is set up as a business in its own right, with its own team of people, and our general managers are trained and developed to run that as if they owned it, and they make decisions on the ground for the day. And as a result, we will outperform against our competitive set, and we're already doing that in the UK. And it's down to the fact that we have decentralized our model. And the difficulty for our competition to catch us is that they don't have the structure and the development going on with their people that we do. So if I was to tell you that today there is 267 people in Dalata on senior development programs, that does not include the 1,000 people who are on what we call skills and craft training, and that's today. and we grow our own people. So when we open our 5 new hotels this year, the 8 to 10 people of the senior management team have grown up in Dalata. So you de-risk the model by having your own team in place. And then we build a local team around that. But having our own team of people who know us and we know them. So, for example, just down the road here in Kevin Street, there was 10 people. Anne-Marie, who was general manager in Smithfield, she came along, and she is the general manager in this brand new hotel, and she's brought people from other skills within Dalata to run those hotels. And as a result of all of those 5 hotels opening, there's another 125 people have got promoted in Dalata since the beginning of January this year. And that means that there's opportunity for people. And it is phenomenally encouraging to see the number of people who want to join us, because they know that if they want a career in the hotel business, we're the go-to guys. We have the systems and the structures. And we have a joint venture with the Irish Management Institute where we give the academic side on one side, but then we have our own people who will give the skills internally as well.
So what do you look for in people?
The first and foremost, if you're not a nice person, I don't want you in Dalata. And if you don't like intensity, you're not going to work in Dalata because you won't survive. Because we are a very intensive business. And it is, if you're looking for a quiet life, I would suggest don't come to Dalata because it is not the place for you. If you want a place where it's changing, where everything is up for grabs, where you're allowed to have your say, you can express yourself in many ways, we're the guys. But if you're not like that, don't bother, because it won't work for you.
What's intensity for you, though? Is it working very hard for 8 or 9 hours, or being on for 13 or 14 hours? No.
I always say to people, if you can't manage yourself, you can't manage my business. And by managing yourself is managing your time that you spend in the business as productively as possible. And if you're there for very long hours, you're probably not going to do what I need to do. So I like people to take their time off. I like them to manage their hours. I don't expect them to be there 24/7. I like them to take their holidays. I like them to do all the things that make them better people in themselves. So it's not about that, but it's about when you're there, it's full on. And it's about things like, for example, filling out. So how many nights in the month did you fill your hotel 100%? And I mean every room in the property. And you'd be amazed at the number of hotels in this city that don't fill ever.
Is that all about price? Is that all about kind of if the rooms are looking, if occupancy isn't looking great, you just kind of lower the price? Or
it's a combination of doing lots of things, and it's about making sure you're open on the channels and the distribution that people know you have space. So it's not just putting it up on your own website and hoping people will come knocking on your door. It doesn't simply work like that. You need to be well distributed as to how you get out there and how you get that business in through your door.
So say I'm a relatively new recruit to the business and I've just got my first, property of my own, as it were, a hotel of my own. And I'm struggling with that time management thing. It's like, Pat, I find I'm just there until 8 or 9 in the evening. What do you tell me? What are your tips for time management?
I always, in fact, it's what I talk to our general managers most about managing themselves and it's down to things even like self-development. What are they doing about, making sure? So I will arrange development programs for them and I will send somebody in. I might send another general manager mentor in to say to them, look, go in and spend a few days with them and just help them through and just point them in the direction where it'll improve their lot. So we do take corrective action around things like that.
Okay, good to know. I'm reassured. I've got my application in the post. Talk to me about what customers are demanding in their rooms these days. I mean, are they becoming more demanding? Are people looking for more spec?
No, not really. I mean, they're what we call, there's basic fundamentals that you need. So you need, obviously, good light, heat, all of that. You need a very comfortable bed, a TV that works and that is not flipping between channels and that you never know what channels are there.
Hotel TVs are tough sometimes, aren't they?
Yeah. And make it very simple. A very good shower, and above all, free and good Wi-Fi.
That's a bugbear of mine.
And
Free Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and if you do that, by and large, you're 90% there. And
So you're saying people are kind of becoming differently discerning. It's not about complete luxury and, you know, marble bathrooms and gold-plated this, that and the other.
No.
But it is about, you want a bloody good bed.
there is a market for that, but that is a limited market. In the broad bulk of things, people want efficiency. They want, obviously, cleanliness is never mentioned, because if you don't have that, you have nothing.
Taken as a given.
Everything else is you're dead in the water anyway.
Have you ever looked at that new kind of market? I say new, but where the rooms are very funky, but also very small and kind of just about enough space for everything, because what people do want is a comfy bed and a nice shower.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you're visiting Dublin or wherever, it's not about sitting in the room all day. It's about getting out.
Again, you need to be careful. They're limited markets, and what happens when you are kind of funky or different, every 5 years you have to reinvent yourself. So we're not in that space. We are straight down the middle. You know what you get. You get exactly what it says on the tin.
So be careful what you wish for in terms
Correct.
of funkiness. Okay.
Excuse me.
That's quite all right. So, I mean, Dalata is really growing apace now. Where do you want to see the business in 10 years' time?
I suppose I'd love to see it still a very large, like we have ambitions to be what we call a pan-European player, and that is simply our ambition. And we have a model and a system that's unique, that is very exportable in that sense. And as long as we keep focusing on what I call the basics, we'll do very well. If we take our eye off that, we won't. So as long as we keep producing people, because the biggest weakness in our model is our inability to produce people, and people who understand the way we manage our business. Because if I'm looking for general managers, I can't get them out there, because they don't fit into our model. They have to come through our system. So I don't care whether you're the best general manager in the world. If you come into Dalata, you go move back a step and you grow, because if otherwise it risks your model.
Does that put the brakes on your ability to expand a bit?
Not at all. As I say, today 267 people on development programs, and some of those are revenue managers, they're sales managers, they're financial controllers, they're purchasing, they're IT. There's a whole spectrum of people growing in the organisation. And the other thing that you have to be mindful as well within an organisation is that people who are growing up with you at a senior level, that they can keep pace with the business. Because what happens in a lot of organisations is they start out relatively small, and then people struggle as the organisation gets bigger. So you need to make sure that they have expansion capabilities as well. So all of those things have to be watched.
So in 10 years' time, you want Dalata to be, as you call it, a pan-European player. What do you think the market is going to look like in 10 years' time, though? Because I'm thinking of those really big names in the global hotel trade, the likes of, Marriott and Starwood recently got together, and then now they're one company. I mean, do you see more of that happening? And how will Dalata fit into that jigsaw?
Well, as a publicly listed company, you're always vulnerable. And your shareholders decide where you go. So, this idea that you're in control of that is simply not true. It's your shareholders decide, what's best. And if they think that you're the person, or that the team in Dalata is the people that will give them the biggest return, that's where they'll stay. If they feel that there's somebody else that'll give them a greater return, that's where they'll go to.
Shareholders aside, but management can kind of push it one way or the other.
Not as simple as that. You can obviously defend your position if you get a bid in, and it depends. And we saw earlier this year Smurfit Kappa defending their position quite well from somebody who wanted to take them over. So,
but equally, chief executives can talk to each other and think that actually our two businesses would work well together and make a proposal to shareholders.
You can do that, and you can create mergers and things like that. But you need to be careful about mergers. History of mergers is, I suppose, littered with failure, because what you tend to do is you bring two cultures together that don't ever seem to work, and what you need to be careful about is that you don't bring that together, and in fact you end up destroying both companies, and that happens quite a lot. So you need to be very, very careful about that.
Did you have trouble ever integrating those hotels that you bought into your culture?
Yes, and I suppose we learned a lot from our acquisition of the Doyle Group back in the late 90s, where you brought them in, and you always have this issue about the victor and the vanquished. And what you can never do is make sure that the people that's coming into the organisation feel in any way that they have let the side down. Because if you get taken over, you always feel you've done something wrong. And of course, that's not true at all. But what you need to do is make sure that people feel part of the new organisation, and it's the new organisation, I suppose, moving ahead. And the other thing that you should never do is people say, well, you take the best out of both cultures and you put it in, and you merge. That is absolutely daft.
So there is a victor and a vanquisher.
There has to be, in the sense of the way the culture of the business is. And if the culture is strong enough, it'll absorb those people much easier.
It sounds like you'd be disappointed if in 10 years' time Dalata is vanquished, as it were, as opposed to a growing victor.
Oh, it would be a disaster. Absolute disaster. Like I suppose, but again, you're always at risk of that. That's the reality. That's what you face. And I guarantee you that probably every day of the week there's some private equity guy in London or New York running the numbers on Dalata and saying, is there an opportunity? That's what the world you're in.
And that's business, and that's a badge of success in itself.
It is, yeah. But what you want to do is be in such a strong place that it makes it kind of almost not a feasible project for them to look at.
Okay. Fascinating stuff. Pat McCann, thank you very much for coming and talk to us today.
Thank you very much. Delighted to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us today on The Architects of Business. Thanks to our guest, Pat McCann, our producer, Patrick Hohey, and all of the team here at Joe. Our programme is made in partnership with EY Entrepreneur of the Year. Go to the website JOE.ie to learn more about the finalists for this year. And don't miss out on future editions of The Architects of Business by subscribing for free on iTunes on your favourite Android podcast app, or you can watch us on YouTube. Check out some of Joe's other podcasts too, including The Hard Yards on Rugby, the GAA Hour, and our movie show, The Big Review Ski. But I'm Tadhg Enright, and for now, thank you very much for being with us, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.